Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something absolutely foundational. We're taking a fascinating, objective look at one of the most influential texts in Judeo-Christian traditions, the Book of Genesis. Whether you view this text purely as ancient literature or as deeply held theology, the structure and the story it tells are undeniably powerful. We're going to look strictly at the source text today to see exactly how it actively pieces together an origin story for a wandering people. So let's kick things off by confronting three massive, universal human questions that this ancient text attempts to answer. Where did we come from? Why is the world broken? And does God actually have a plan? Every civilization, every philosophy tries to grapple with these, right? Well, the tradition holds that God intentionally set out to answer these exact questions through this specific book. To see exactly how this text tackles those big questions, we'll be moving through 6 key areas today. We'll look at the purpose behind Genesis, the origin of all things, the entry of brokenness, the themes of justice, mercy, and promise, how it uses imperfect people, and finally, the ultimate redemption plan. Let's get right into it. Starting right off with Section 1, the purpose behind Genesis, the narrator and the framework. Now, long-standing Jewish and Christian tradition points to Moses as the author, or at least the compiler of this book. But look at his resume here. He isn't framed as some perfect, untouchable saint. Not at all. He was actually a fugitive, a broken shepherd who was once totally lost, called by God to preserve a foundational origin story for a wandering people. He wasn't just recording dry history. He was given this monumental task to communicate a sense of purpose to people who were literally lost in the wilderness. And in doing this, the source text actually reveals 7 distinct intentions holding up the entire narrative framework. It's a highly structured piece of literature, starting with establishing God as the creator and moving through humanity's origins, the entry of sin, demonstrations of justice and mercy, and eventually setting the stage for a much, much bigger story. Which brings us perfectly to Section 2, the origin of all things, intention over randomness. Genesis really doesn't waste any time. It immediately sets a massive theological foundation. Way before time or nations as we know them, it states that God alone created the heavens and the earth. And the big takeaway here? It's a profound declaration that life is not an accident. The world isn't some random cosmic event. It's deeply intentional, and it was designed on purpose for a purpose. And you can see this perfect design clearly in how the text explains the origin of humanity itself. Through the figures of Adam and Eve, it outlines this ideal state. Humans were created in God's image. They were designed specifically for a close relationship with God, walking and talking with Him with absolutely no fear and zero shame. Plus, they were meant to be stewards over the earth. Basically, this was humanity exactly as it was meant to be, in perfect closeness to the divine. But well, obviously that isn't the world we're living in today, is it? So let's move to Section 3, the entry of brokenness, the fall, and the flood. Here, the text gives an impartial, theological answer to the problem of pain by drawing a really sharp contrast. We just talked about that perfect design, created for fearless relationship. But then look at the fall. A single choice of disobedience changed everything. Sin enters the narrative, pain follows right behind it, and separation begins. This is the text's fundamental explanation for why things went off the rails. And what's fascinating is that the narrative doesn't just treat this as some dusty, ancient history. It connects that original fracture to the very relatable modern human condition, as the source captures it. And today, we still feel the weight of that moment. Brokenness, confusion, emptiness. It's this cinematic shift in tone that acknowledges the reality of human suffering right now, tracing it directly back to that original act of disobedience. But as the narrative world grew darker and evil increased, God didn't stay silent. Let's look at Section 4, Justice, Mercy, and Promise, Rebuilding Humanity. Through the story of Noah's Ark, the text introduces a divine response that carefully balances strict judgment with profound grace. People often just think of this as a cute story about animals on a boat, but it actually functions as a deep theological statement. It represents strict judgment against a world that had grown incredibly dark, but perfectly balanced with the mercy of preserving hope, preserving life, and intentionally granting humanity a second chance. Even in judgment, the text argues, God remembered mercy. And that mercy builds into an incredible, multi-generational saga. You can see on this timeline the unbroken chain of a divine covenant. From the mercy and survival of Noah, God calls Abraham and makes a promise to bless all nations through him. And that promise doesn't just die there. It's actively carried forward to Isaac, then to Jacob, and down to Joseph. It traces a singular promise meant to rebuild humanity, passed like a baton from one generation to the very next. Which transitions us perfectly into Section 5, using imperfect people, flaws, and divine purpose. Now, if you read closely, the text actively highlights the messes, the betrayals, and the flaws of its heroes. Honestly, it reads a lot more like a messy family drama than a pristine roster of perfect saints. Moses was a broken shepherd. Abraham was deeply imperfect, yet chosen simply because he believed. Joseph was betrayed, sold into slavery, and forgotten by his own brothers. Every major figure in Genesis has deep flaws or faces incredible worldly challenges. The text does this intentionally to reinforce that divine purpose absolutely does not depend on human perfection. God uses imperfect people. And that brings us to this incredible quote from the story of Joseph, which really hits the nail on the head regarding the book's central theological claim. What people meant for evil, God turned for good. Joseph's brothers sold him out of jealousy, a profoundly evil act. Yet, through this wild series of events, Joseph rises to power and actually saves his family, and really the known world, from famine. It proves the narrative's point. God is always working behind the scenes. Finally, we reach the culmination of our explainer today. Section 6. The Ultimate Redemption Plan, a prologue to salvation. These 3 steps right here are the ultimate answer Genesis provides to those core human questions we asked at the very beginning. Where did we come from? Well, God created a perfect world, designed for relationship. Why is it broken? Humanity fell into brokenness through disobedience. Does God have a plan? Yes, He initiated a plan to restore everything, starting with a promise to Abraham and working through deeply flawed people to actually see it through. So the crucial point is that Genesis functions not as an ending but as a sweeping prologue. Moses wasn't just recording history. According to the tradition, he was documenting the opening chapter of a massive rescue mission. Genesis literally sets the stage for the rest of the Bible, pointing directly toward a coming salvation. It is, fundamentally, the beginning of redemption. Which leaves us with a final, provocative thought. If this ancient story began with such pure intention, if it claims that we were designed on purpose and that there is an active plan to restore what was broken, is that story still being written today? Does the God who started this story still actively shape yours? I'll leave you to consider how these foundational texts might continue to resonate with our modern search for meaning and purpose. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep asking the big questions.